Namaste, Dad.
Namaste.
How are we?
Oh, well, uh, in excellent spirits, I would say.
You always are.
Well, mostly, yes.
Yeah.
And if not, then I try to hide it, but you know, one does what one must to stay cheerful.
That's very nice. First of all, thank you for this interview.
Oh, well, you're certainly welcome.
And I've been wanting to take this interview for a very long time, but
Oh,
I've been lazy and life happens and things get postponed. So here we
true.
are.
Well, that's part of life. As things intervene between you and your plans. And as our friend John says, calendar dates are always closer than they appear.
True.
So like one of my borrowed maxims that are in one of my favorites.
Oh, lovely. So, I just wanted to know, I have so many questions to ask you. And one of them is, what is the meaning of life for you?
Oh, well, of course, that's a very difficult question to ask because, first of all, there's no clear-cut answer, and those ideas that come up are always ever-shifting. So, but I think it's our responsibility to look for and find some kind of meaning in life. But we have to discover that for ourselves, and we have to be prepared to change our minds about it.
Right.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most that we ever know about life and its meaning, quote unquote, is a kind of ever-shifting thing.
Right.
You know, you can form an opinion, but the idea of perfect knowledge, I think, is not something I believe in anyway.
Right.
Because the reality, knowledge, truth, they're so vast, and they flow into one another, and sometimes over and under one another, and it's always shifting. Things are in flux, so it's difficult always to come up with a kind of what you would call meaning of life.
An answer to that question.
But, you know, I have a few larger generalizations that I look for,
Yeah.
and so the meaning of life is to sort of find your truths for yourself, discover your own truths, work toward those. We all look for things that give life meaning, and so that's a search. So I would say one of those things that we look for is love, but then you have to understand, you know, and that looms large in song and fable, etc. You discover over life, you know, what that means. Love is not always a cheerful thing, you know. Sometimes it really is a very cruel thing.
Wow. But it
looking-
all, I believe you're saying it all adds up to understanding that
well,
meaning.
I'm just saying,
of
casting
life.
aside all negative things that you might associate with it,
Mm-hmm.
in the long run, it's something that we feel we need.
Right.
But you know, it isn't always a bed of roses.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that would be your fault or the fault of whatever is the other entity is that you love, or both, you know. It's hard.
Yeah,
There's
and
no such thing as perfect love.
so
But
you're I believe, and correct me if I'm not right in this, what you're saying is the meaning of life is there's a lot of love that forms one's life, right? But love has different shades,
yes,
you know,
indeed.
and
Yeah.
that all forms the, you know, that all is part of the meaning of life.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Well, that's one of the bigger parts of life, is
yeah,
finding love, of which there are many forms.
right,
And some loves are short, some are intermittent, and some are long-lasting.
hmm,
Some of them have long shelf life. It's a matter of a lot of factors. Sometimes it's just a matter of luck. But, you know, the more you work and the more prepared you are, the luckier you seem to get.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that can make a difference. At least it usually does. I mean, there are no promises or certainties.
Right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's all right.
Can you, in a nutshell, give us a sort of a statement that would be, I mean, it's a broad question, meaning of life, but in a nutshell, what would you say? Would there be a statement that you could make and say, this is the possible closest answer to the question, what is the meaning of life?
Well, probably not, but as I say, there are a few generalizations you can make. One is to discover love, one is to look for fulfillment, one is to learn how to serve others, one is to discover what your faith is, and how does that impact on your life. One is to look for one or more life's projects.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying it's a process of evolution.
I think we evolve in a lot of ways.
Right.
And that to be aware of that and to assist that where practicable is one of our purposes in life. And if there is some entity that places us in this world and therefore gives us purpose to life, that's one of the things we have to sort of try to understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So my next question to you is, you've lived a long life and a very good one. And I say good one is in the sense I've known you as a parent for a few years now, and I feel there is a connection between you and me, which could be from another life, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing you, knowing you, understanding you, I feel you've lived a good life because you also count your difficult phases of life and sorrows of life as a positive part of growing up.
Mm-hmm.
What are the few big events in your life that you associate joy and happiness and success with, that you would say have helped form you the person that you are?
Well, I think I have to think a minute, but discovering those things that somehow illuminate me, make me feel happy, enhance my life.
Can I give you a little hint?
Well,
which will make it easy for you to put your thoughts together. I think one of them is definitely being confident, coming to terms with your sexual identity.
Well, that's true.
Right.
That's true. I think the thing about that too is to kind of relax in a sense, because someone I knew once said one of our problems with sexuality is we put it up on a huge pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you have to realize that there are so many things in life, many things beyond that, but it's my belief that we get to choose. Not that, we're born with certain, I don't even like to use the word tendencies. We're born in a certain way and our sexuality emerges, and I think that it's good to accept that and then find the positive ways of integrating it into our consciousness and our existence. But you have to also realize that there are many other things besides, something that you could just pin a label on. Well, I'm gay, well, I'm straight, therefore I must do this, I must do this to be fulfilled. I think that there are no roles connected with one's sex or gender, is a better word, or sexual preference. You just discover who you are and become your authentic self.
Right, so
And no one really has the right to tell you where you need to look or where you're going or how you ought to be in that way.
Right. So when you came to terms with mostly accepting and understanding who you are. That was one of the big
It
events
was
in
a
your...
turning point.
And how old were you?
Well, it occurred over a long time. I mean, it really started when I was just a very young kid, and then certain events happened to put ideas and associations in my mind, and then I had to discover how valid those might be, or whether there was some kind of urgent thing behind it. And I think that, of course, as you go through life, the urgencies in your life change. But it took me quite a while to relax, because there were a lot of people who were very concerned about what my sexuality might be. There were a lot of signs.
I see.
And I had to get over worrying about their worrying about me.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people tried to redirect my interests.
Oh, interesting.
And you know, at first I didn't have very much of a defense against that. And so I complied with a lot of things that I didn't care for very much. Really had no meaning for me. But the lucky thing, I guess you might say, is that after a certain point, people let me go my own way. You know, occasionally they would express concern, but one thing I learned was, well, okay, no one can decide except for me. I don't want to be in Little League Baseball. It's good for some people, but I think my future and my destiny, if you want to use that word, were in other arenas.
And you were, in the end, it was you who was in control of...
Well, yeah, I think that people observed me and they saw that I was happier, and that I was achieving some things that they could be proud of, like my parents, or that they could identify with. Many of my friends. We enjoyed certain things together, going to concerts, talking about music, listening to records, making music together, that sort of thing. And I think that when people saw that this was not a disaster, that I was actually happy, and that really helped a lot, you know, because a lot of the people who were in my life as what shall we say, advisors, people who give you, there's a word I'm trying to find, counselors, I guess, people who I eventually accepted.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you would say that one of the biggest events of your life was your self-discovery, beginning of your self-discovery.
Well, I think that discovering the validity of those things that I was attracted to or somehow fulfilled me or interested me. And, you know, and I found out what they were as I evolved. You know, and it was something that was beyond just mere sexuality. There was also as I've already mentioned, my love of music, but then there were my love of other people, discovering the person who eventually became my spouse. I missed the target once, and we parted company, and not very long after that I discovered what I suppose people would call my soulmate. That made a great difference in life for me.
Can I quickly add, I believe your grandma was a very good support factor for you in your maybe in your teenage years as a parent to...
My grandmother?
No, your mother, my grandmother.
She was. Yeah.
Did that help you in...
Well, she was very helpful in a lot of ways. You know, she herself was being counseled at the time, and so she got a lot of reassurance from the counselor that I was well capable of finding these things along the way, and over time adjusting to whatever I needed to adjust to, you know, that kind of thing, that I would probably be okay, that I didn't have serious problems, you know.
Well, it's great that you had such a good support factor in your
Well,
mother.
I think, yeah, much more than many gay people at the time, certainly.
Right.
You know, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go my own way. I had friends who, you know, were given such a resistance, who experienced such resistance from their families, friends, society, that they covered their tracks, you might say, in inappropriate relationships, in some cases marriages which eventually turned out not to be something in either, you know, anyone's favor. No one has.
Do you mean unmatched marriages? When you say inappropriate, you mean unmatched.
Well, I mean,
you mean
they didn't intermesh with their spouse. Their sexuality wasn't really
exactly.
They were doing this because they felt they should be doing it.
They had to fit to a societal.
They had to fit into a societal mode. Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't work for them. But luckily, because your parents supported you, especially grandma, your mother, it gave you the confidence
to proceed in my own direction when I was concerned, where I found a spouse. I like to use the word spouse.
Yeah. But that's my next, that's the next event you mentioned, was meeting your soulmate. I personally believe there are more than one soulmates that we have, but it could be a cultural thing. So that, as you mentioned, was a big event in your life, where you met your spouse.
A very big event, yeah. If you meet a really good spouse, that's a big event in anyone's life. It's a matter of a lot of things. I suppose you'd have to say it's a matter of good luck, but then I know I'm repeating myself, which is the more prepared I am and the harder I work, the luckier I seem to be. It's not always true, but I think it's a kind of maxim. I guess when preparation meets opportunity, you can really go into some. It depends on whether opportunity is there. Sometimes it isn't because of, some people are very prepared, very ready for things, but the opportunity doesn't occur.
Right. So how has meeting Tom, your better half, helped you, in your life?
Well, of course, companionship is a big thing. Feeling the support of another person whom you know loves you. Your life begins to change and intermesh. You make sacrifices for each other. You also, when it's difficult, you have to come to terms with the difference. And I'm lucky that my Tom was really pretty good at explaining, exploring, being reasonable about these things. Not in every case, but many.
What other event would you add to that question? Big events in your life that shaped you after you met Tom. Is there another event that comes to your mind? Can I give you a hint?
I think I know what you're leading to, but go ahead.
Music.
Well, music.
Right.
Music is something that came into my life.
Right.
And into his life. I mean, it came along with me, and we really like the same kind of things. Pieces that we share. We go to concerts, and we like certain pieces.
And how young were you when you discovered you had a love for music?
Oh golly, I suppose around somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. I heard quite a bit around the house when I was a child. And my aunt, bless her heart, subscribed to a series of recordings made for young people, and they were mostly folk stories, folklore, traditional stories, that, enhanced very much by music, very well written music. And it was called the Children's Record Guild. And a recording would come once a month, and they were 78s at the time, vinyl 78s, and occasionally you would get a double album where there was more music, but they were well written, they really came out of the tradition of radio plays, and to a certain degree, movies, which use music as a part of a descriptive and enhancing factor. But they were all very, very, very well written.
I must say that you're one of the, not because you're my dad, but, and I don't mean to sound biased or partial, and if I am, well, that's all right. I haven't met another person who is as knowledgeable and as talented about Western classical music as you are. And I've learned so much from you, and it's so impressive to see the knowledge you have and the talents you have when it comes to music, and how humble you are about it. You played recorder, you are a percussionist, you are a music teacher for 35
30, just 30.
30, sorry,
I was
30
lucky
years.
I got out 5 years early.
Right. And then you are in one of the board of directors in the chamber music.
That's true. That was an important association for me.
So, am I correct in saying that music has been one of your soulmates?
Oh, I think you can say that. Yeah, it's something in which I've related to spiritually, and in a very intense manner. It's difficult to say. Define of the effect of music on oneself. I think it really certainly enhances your understanding of the world around you, often in an abstract way, sometimes very directly, particularly when it's joined with words. But music often goes beyond words. It sometimes is directly connected with words, sometimes it's words parallel to words, sometimes it's merely abstract.
I see. And clearly it means a lot to you, doesn't it?
Oh, very much. If I'd lose my hearing or be in an environment where I could connect with it for some reason, it'd be very difficult to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, so these are the events that shaped you, as you said. The music.
Well, many of them. Yeah. I mean, there are probably many that if I think about them, they'll occur to me later.
Right.
Meeting you, for example, has been very important.
Right. You became a parent when you...
Becoming a parent. That was something that I was looking for, and there's a kind of completion in becoming involved in a person in that way.
Right.
There's a spousal sort of love. There's a love of children too.
Right.
Other family members.
Okay.
You can go on and on, but I think that's saying it rather succinctly.
Well, thank you. I feel honored. Now, you also have a great love for other cultures. It's just not restricted and limited to the Western world. I've noticed
that's true. Yeah.
I've noticed that you have great appreciation for East Indian cultures, for Southern American cultures, for African cultures, and other native Indian cultures from the U.S. And the Americas in general. How did this develop?
Oh, well, bit by bit. I don't know. It's hard to come up with shall we say, it just happened. I was exposed to it, I think initially through music, and I took a course. I've had a course in world music.
Right.
And I've had a course in Indian architecture, and that's when I just began to discover that there were other arts, other societies that were very interesting, which had many riches to offer, both in the past and now.
Right. Well, you and your spouse, you're both quite patrons of art.
Well, this is true. Yeah, we support what we can afford to support.
Right, and you have, I think you are an art critic, really. You have a great eye you have great observation skills, and you're very good at it.
Thank you.
Now let's move on to the other event in your life that really, correct me if I'm wrong, helped you shape as a person, and that was photography.
Oh, well, that's something, yeah. Well, my father was a photographer.
Right.
And so, of course, it started there. And I used to go into his darkroom and watch him work. In those days, it was all what you call lab work, in the sense that it was done through mechanical means. You know, you put the negative in and you shine it down on the paper, you dodge it.
Right.
And he would do things with his hands to either burn in or make areas of the finished image darker or paler, and he was very good at that. There was also something called retouching, where you took the physical negative, in this case they were usually about that, and he would peer through this negative, not the negative, he would peer through this magnifying glass, and he would alter the negative in a lot of ways, mostly removing little blemishes, either with a little knife or covering over with graphite, very sharp graphite leads.
Clearly, you've been, see again, it goes to prove what I said, your observation skills are fantastic because you could remember everything. And much later on in your life, you used those skills to develop your own talent.
I guess that was a sort of an influence, you know.
Right.
That we had, you know, the kind of thing.
Yeah, you know, Dad, I've noticed many artists are not just clever in one area of art, but they are sort of clever in many areas of art, and it is quite prominent that a lot of them are people who appreciate world cultures from different cultures. Now, one of the area of art that I think you have excelled, other than music and photography, is also cooking.
Oh, thank you, cuisine.
Yeah, cuisine, the art of cooking. And do you want to...
Gastronomy, you might say. I first thought that was a funny
It's
term.
wonderful. Every time I mention these fields, there's a smile on your face, and goes to show how deeply passionate you are as an art person and as an artist. So how did that develop? And
Well, that's an interesting question. I suppose I trace it back to when I went to Germany. Because that was my first exposure to a different cuisine, not so different from what I grew up with, but I traveled around and we visited a number of countries.
how old were you?
I was about 20, I was 20. And so, it started off with discovering that there were many wonderful kinds of bread. And then each country was specialized with bread and or the viticulture or even beer, much better than what I grew up with. These products, food products, went back for millennia, really, and had been developed in situ, right there. Refined by artisans who were in the same family, who passed along and trained their children and so forth. And they had a passion for whatever their product was.
You mean traditional forms of
cooking
inspired you?
Making cheese, for example, or baking, cooking certain kinds of food, making pasta, that kind of thing.
You're an excellent cook. Both you and your spouse are, and it's not just Western European cooking. I think you guys are both of you experiment a lot with Asian cooking, whether it's cultures like China, Japan. You're attracted to, and India, and
well, again, exposure helps. And then a little experimentation. So a lot of cooking I do, I would probably classify as fusion, which is, a bit of this and a bit of that encountered.
Right,
I'm
right.
not really what you call that much of a purist, but I can be very fussy about the way I cook rice, for example, or the kind of rice that I use,
Yeah,
or the kind of noodles that I might make,
yeah.
or the way I cook a vegetable.
Which are your favorite cuisines in the world?
Oh, well, Indian cuisine is very way up there. I really like what you might call the Mediterranean tradition of diet, but then, I've had an opportunity to dabble a bit in a few others. I guess my favorite cuisine is whatever cuisine I'm eating at the moment that's giving me intense enjoyment.
Right. Talking about favorites, I totally forgot to ask you, who is your favorite, who are your favorite conductors and
They're legion.
composers?
They're legion. I like the one thing that the media have given us is our recordings of conductors of the past, and we have great access to contemporary. So I'm just like so many along the way. I started out by listening. I think the first conductor that I was really aware of was I think he was Austrian, Bruno Walter.
Oh, I see.
And then
What century was that?
Well, he was alive in the late 19th century and lived probably through the 60s. And I owned a number of recordings of his. He was probably one of the first conductors I actually knew the name of.
Right.
So I really liked him very, very much. I discovered other conductors later on. Toscanini, of course, who died when I was, about, that's hard, I don't, it was 1954 or so I was about 9. But we had some friends that had 78 RPM mono recordings of his work, so I became aware. Then later in life I discovered his contemporary Furtwängler and another towering figure in music. Oh golly.
And of course goes without saying, Mozart. Mozart.
Oh, well, he's a composer, which of course is another thing. Golly, who was the first composer? I think Schubert and Mozart and Tchaikovsky were the first composers that I became, the great composers that I became acquainted with their name. Of course, I knew John Philip Sousa. I knew some composers that